Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September 2024 TELedvisors webinar, where we're looking at changes. What happens when an institution changes the LMS? I'm Colin Simpson, one of the conveners of the TELedvisors Network. And today we're going to be joined by Professor Michael Sankey, Kate Mitchell, and Anthony Tibbs, providing different perspectives on what happens in these kind of initiatives, let's say. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which many of us are meeting today. In my case, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. If you are not familiar with the TELedvisors Network, we are a community of practitioners for people working in what is often referred to as the third space in tertiary education. So we transcend academic and professional roles as we support learning and teaching, research, and many other kind of areas. And we are sitting underneath the Ascolite kind of umbrella, and we thank them for their support. So how we're going to run this is Michael and Kate and Anthony will talk briefly about specific work that they've been doing, and then we'll sort of turn this into more of a panel discussion. So I'm going to start off with Michael. Professor Michael Sankey is the director of the ACODE Learning Technologies Leadership Institute and an adjunct in the Faculty of Arts and Society at Charles Darwin University. He is also the recent, actually, I'll stop sharing. Oh, no, you've already done that for me. He's also the recent past president of ACODE, specialises in the area of e-learning pedagogies, multimodal design, authentic assessment, visual and multi-literacies, and his recent research has focused on the advent of generative artificial AI, kind of a hot topic right now, learning and teaching quality and enhancement systems, the multiple representation of concepts when utilising multimedia technologies and Web 2.0 environments, and how the use of blended learning can enhance student learning opportunities, particularly for those studying at a distance. So that's all the time we've got. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, mate. Look, I do want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Larrakia land and pay respects to both elders past and present, and enjoying the build-up up here. So it gets a little bit steamy at this time of year as we build up towards the wet season. We all want it to rain, but it doesn't quite rain just yet, but we'll get there. Just very quickly, I just want to show you where we've come from to where we're going. 2020. This is what it looked like, the LMS structure. I put a post up on LinkedIn last night about this for those who saw that. Quite a few people have already. But at that point, in 2020, Blackboard was the dominant LMS provider in Australia, followed by Moodle. 2 years later, by virtue of the fact that Blackboard lost ground and Canvas gained ground, Moodle for a while popped up to be the top LMS provider in Australia. And with Canvas and Blackboard neck and neck there. Now, 2 years on, so we're only talking 2020, 2022, 2024. Canvas now has 15 institutions. Moodle runs in second at 12, Blackboard down to 10. And D2L's picked up one in New South Wales as well. So it's a changing space. We're seeing some movement in the markets, not just in Australia. We see that movement. Of course, we see it across the globe as well. In the North American market, we see Canvas is starting to blitz it in there, but also Brightspace D2L is starting to pick up ground as well. So in that market, we see Brightspace and Canvas are winning new accounts. Anthology is losing ground, as is Moodle, and also Canvas now has 41% market share, which is quite a significant share in that North American market. Blackboard fell by 18% of the market share to just have 17% of market. Moodle has plateaued around 16, and Brightspace has increased its market share in North America to 16%. The other LMSs that are there, you might note OpenLMS, which did use Moodle as its basis and still does to a great extent, has got 3% of the market there, as some others have. In the UK, it's a little bit different. Out of the 247 higher education institutions, we see 53% of those on Moodle, and Blackboard still just nudging out Canvas in that regard. But the market is slowly moving to the latter, the Canvas and the Brightspace. So we see that there is some movement, and that Blackboard and Moodle, if they don't improve what they're doing, they're going to end up as Canvas will be second spot pretty soon. And Brightspace continues to grow in the market as well. Globally, we see, first in Europe, we see that Moodle still has great dominance at 69% of the market, down from 62%, and all the others down there at the bottom at 8%, 5%, etc., like that. More so globally, the big four dominate still. We see Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, and Brightspace being the main users. Moodle goes from 73% in Latin America down to 56% in Oceania. And some of the common trends, of course, as we're seeing, and you see from that line down the bottom there, that Canvas is starting to pick up quite dramatically there, and has caught up with Blackboard, and will start to overtake that fairly soon in this more global market and European market. But the reason I'm here is to talk about what we did with our LMS review. And I was very fortunate to have some key staff up here at Charles Darwin University: Bill Wade, Sept Bill Searle, who's on the meeting, I notice, and and Holly Burgoyne, who's not on the paper, but were instrumental in pulling together a very comprehensive review of our learning management system. We've been long-term Blackboard users, and we felt it was time, with the changes that we'd seen in the market, to make some decisions about what we would do in relation to LMS to take us forward. We did adopt what was called the two-phase project, which we proposed in this paper, and that is about, one, establishing the case for a review. You don't want to do a review just because you think it's a good idea. There has to be a strong case to say, okay, there's a strong enough feeling to say that we need to do something about this. Now, I have seen institutions that haven't done this, that a new DVC has come into play, and that new DVC has had very strong ideas about what learning management system they want in place, and so that happens. And I've seen that in at least 3 institutions over the last 3 years, 4 institutions over the last 4 years, actually. But anyway, in our particular case, we weren't necessarily looking to change, but we did think we should do our due diligence to find out if there was a case for us to change. And so what we did is, in this particular case, we also knew that JCU was looking at the same thing. So we asked to partner with JCU to help develop some questions for our staff and student surveys. And we asked Professor Alf Lizio, who some of you might know from Griffith, to oversee our phase 1 and to sense check the questions we were going to use for our students and our staff, and to provide us a report once we could consider as to whether we should continue. So we did. We surveyed students, and we surveyed staff, and we consulted with our partner institutions. So that took us to that first decision point. In this particular case, we decided, yes, we would go forward to the next stage, whereas JCU decided they were going to stay where they were at that point. And so they left this process, and we continued on alone. And it took a comprehensive comparison of tools, some vendor demonstrations, and then made some decisions at the decision point 2 there. Having said that, in everything we do, we consider the notion that the LMS is an element of the technology-enhanced learning ecology that we all use. And you see there the learning management system sits up the top of that circle, but there are a whole range of other systems and web applications and data that need to be considered in making such a decision. So it's not just about the LMS anymore. It is also about the other tools that we have in that ecology, and will those tools also work as equally well with another LMS if we decided to put one in. For us, there were some must-haves for the LMS. It was that we needed to be able to increase the notion of interaction, that we needed to consider the training implications of putting a new LMS in. We had to ensure that our analytics were as good, if not better, than our previous version. we would need to have a platform that would allow us to consider all things in terms of usability through the notion of implementing universal design, and also that there's a socio-emotive element to learning that needs a more social aspect. And so social media and the usability of the product become really important for us. So we had to establish a case. So we surveyed our staff and students. We had 262 staff respond to the survey and 4,000 students. So that was jolly good, I reckon. The 4,000 students participating in a survey was just fantastic. We established some aspirational needs of what we would want in a new learning management system based on what we knew and based on the sector surveys that we'd done. And we found that there were 389 discrete functionalities that we wanted within the LMS. And we asked all the vendors to provide a list of things associated with that. These were organised around 5 functional capabilities: accessibility, what the educator would experience, what the student would experience, what the administrator would experience, and then what were the implications on training. And of course, then we consulted with our partner institutions and consultants to understand that this was, if these things were achievable and we were taking the right approach to this. I'm not going to try and unpack this. This is in the paper, but it does talk through what we found from our stage one of the investigation. So as I say, I'm not going to unpack that for you now, so limited time, and I know you guys can read. So I think you should go and download the paper and read it for yourself. Part of the element was creating all these different elements we wanted to make sure that systems had. So you see here, we had general usability, we had accessibility, and you'll notice down the bottom there are tabs. And Bill Searle put this together. It was a fantastic effort pulling all this different data together. So we said around accessibility and usability, what would happen to the educators, those 5 things that I mentioned before. And we had a whole range of elements associated with each of those and the 300 and something different elements. And so then we were rating them yes, no, partial, and then vendor response to these. Very robust situation there. We did choose the Big 4 for the investigation, and we co-designed personas and scenarios to cover that we asked them to cover. So each of the vendors had to, provide that feedback on the spreadsheet, but also then had to respond to different personas and scenarios that we gave them. Ultimately, we needed to answer the question, should we stay or should we go? And so the 8 scenarios included the multi-campus and hybrid learning, large student cohorts, student progression, vet-TAFE scenarios, AI and LMS, student administration scenario, short course in the LMS, and STEM and the LMS. And each had to demonstrate how they met those requirements. Now, we didn't ask all 4 to demonstrate. We actually we knocked 1 out and only 3 had to demonstrate. What we did was we created this open education resource for the learning management system review, which has all the case studies in it, and that's available for you as an ebook. And in this ebook, it has scenarios. There's a large student cohort scenario. If I was to click on that, it will open up the book, and you'll see here there's scenarios on new educator, teaching students in multiple locations, large student cohort, student progression, and it gives the context there and also the tasks that we would want them to do in the LMS. So each of the vendors had to look at these tasks and then respond to those tasks. Okay, again, in the article, we talk about the learning management system review step-by-step checklist that we've developed. And so that involved the consultation and the user experience with the current LMS, the essential steps and the value adds that we wanted to see, and also the vendor comparison and selection process, essential steps and the value adds again. I'm just going to go back. So I'm just going to go back 1 slide there. Oops. No, I'm not. I'm just going to exit. Anyway, what happened was, what we found was on the spreadsheet that there was a bee's dick difference between any of the LMS providers. They all mostly provided all the functionality we needed, and that we largely were left to consider some of the external features that we could pull together. So what I'm trying to say is there's so little difference. We chose the three that had the most. One didn't come up to the strength. That was pretty close, I'd have to say. And really, there was only came down to 3 or 4 differences in the systems. And so we felt it right to offer the opportunity to present for 3 of the vendors. And they did so. And again, we came up with a preferred solution. That preferred solution was going to cost us about $8 million to implement. The university decided it didn't have $8 million to spend on an LMS transition. And so the second option, our second preference, was the vendor we ended up staying with. So are we happy about that? Yes, we are. The functionality improved. I think if I knew what I knew now, I think that would have been the preferred vendor, because Blackboard Anthology, which we use, Anthology Blackboard, has increased its functionality exponentially over the last 6 months, far faster than I was anticipating. So I'm quite happy the fact that we stayed with Blackboard. We could have moved to another platform, but at that point, it was not feasible. Though it may not, that doesn't rule it out for the future. But if Blackboard Anthology continue to improve as they have been, I think we'll find that to be a really good option moving forward. But that's I'm semi-retired now, so I don't give 2 hoots.
Thank you so much, Michael. We'll save questions for afterwards because there's still a couple of bits to go through, but it is good to, that was a really good overview of just the detail and the thought that is actually behind these kind of initiatives, because they affect everything. So moving on, our next presenter is Kate Mitchell. Kate is a senior learning designer at the University of Melbourne, where she specialises in ePortfolio development and blended learning initiatives. She supports academic staff in transitioning their courses to online and hybrid formats, particularly through the effective use of educational technologies. She has been actively involved in the broader educational community as a founding member of the TELedvisors Network. She's now a leader in the Learning Design SIG, and she's also a committee member of ePortfolios Australia. So over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Colin. Please feel free to keep me the time. Colin said you've worked at lots of different unis. I'm sure you have an idea, like something to offer around like what do different people do. But what I heard from that was change projects, not LMS change projects. So keep that in mind, that mine is probably a little bit broader. But I think like the two are often intertwined, which I'll get to anyway. I won't talk about me except to note that I've been at 4 different Victorian unis, a New South Wales uni briefly, and 1 OPM from 2011 until now. Depending on whether you're counting LMS change or broader initiatives as change projects, I've seen potentially about I've seen a couple of conversions to Canvas. I was at VU when we did a massive change from WebCT back in the day to Design Learn Brightspace. And then I got to see what UNE were doing recently. I've also been involved in ePortfolio migration and change projects, as well as sort of larger curriculum and redesign projects. So, and I'm now working in ePortfolios, where that sees looking at procurement. I did a survey to kind of just to note that, okay, I've seen stuff, but that doesn't mean that my experience is the same as everybody else's. So the survey I sent out that we got about 20 responses on is heavily biased, and it is like, I'm just trying to note that it is not accurate data. Did I put it here? Oh, I must have moved it. Here we go. It's not robust. It's small scale snapshot, convenient sampling amongst our cohorts. So just take it with a grain of salt, really. Like it's really just to start sparking some conversation and to validate whether my experience anecdotally is similar or contradicts what is happening out there. Um, my assumptions are that unis actually undergo lots of change and that we've all been doing it in some form. Most large scale change involves either that redesign work or technology ecosystem changes or both, sometimes combined in the one initiative or larger project or program of work. In terms of the redesign work, it typically tends to favour one academic or a small team of academics paired with one or a small team of support folks doing that kind of individual unit by unit or subject by subject work. And that like a lot of those large scale changes typically at a tech level also involve some kind of pedagogic change or a rationale around doing that it's not just about implementing the tech. And my other assumption is that there's actually limited evaluation happening. Um, my first assumption, certainly the people who responded to the survey have all been part of large scale change projects, probably two or more. Whether that's because institutions are actually doing a lot of change, given that we have new strategies every few years, or if it's just that our sample tends to probably favour learning designers who are in project roles and hired specifically to undertake that change work. I don't really know, but that's something that we could definitely explore more. I think that idea that unis are slow to change is something that we need to start interrogating a bit because I think a lot of us actually go through a lot of change and a lot of change projects. So, and if we're also arguing people are change fatigued, then how do you reconcile those two contradictory ideas? Is it that maybe we're not taking the lessons learned from those changes? I don't know. So anyway, my assumption that we've all kind of done it still holds true. I asked people what changes they'd been involved in, and for the most part, it was the same sort of stuff that I would expect to see. But a couple of other things around major strategy, digital uplift came up quite a bit. So you can see that there's been those typically large scale changes, either a technology change or it's a strategic learning and teaching change. The reasons given around that tended to note efficiency or student experience or digital innovation or digital transformation or digital uplift. The other one that I wasn't necessarily expecting was around compliance, like TEXA compliance, and that seemed to come out a bit more. So, so those tend to be the reasons that for those changes given, as we
Sorry,
can see
Kay,
here.
did you
Yeah.
just want to briefly expand on what is involved in digital uplift?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a vague name. Often it tends to be, sometimes it can be just getting minimum online presence. I hear the term a lot, and typically it tends to be let's at least get everybody at a good baseline level of, say, online minimum product so that, say, students can always find their assessments online, they can find their handbook or course data, or subject data, whatever you want to call it, that there's a welcome and announcement kind of thing. So it's really often about getting at least some kind of core presence in the LMS, even if not everything's in there. And it's often, might involve upskilling as well. So these were the reasons given a lot of times. And a bit of what came through was people sort of noting that sometimes it was a tech change, but you couldn't call it a tech change, and it was often like a um, like something was out of contract or out of service. And so we have to actually move, but we can't say that that's the reason for implementing a large scale change. We have to couch it as some kind of innovative thing. So that came through a little bit with a couple of the responses, which I thought was really interesting because I think a few of us know that. But I guess that brings into mind of like, if people know that, like how many people then take these changes seriously, and does that then potentially cause a little bit of resistance when we're working across whole faculties or institutions? So I thought that was interesting. I guess with digital uplift, it could also involve delivery mode changes, which I've been involved in quite a bit. My other key assumptions, which are the meaty ones, which is why I've really raced through the others, that was about, well, what, especially when we're doing large scale redesigns, what does that look like? My experience is typically in that one-to-one or small group to small group individual subject kind of work, which I think is problematic. It's very resource intensive, people intensive. Uh, it's not necessarily scalable well, and it tends to be working at that individual unit rather than programmatic, which means you're not necessarily being holistic in your work either. But then other group-based approaches are sort of the alternative that you might do, especially if it's, say, training how to use the LMS. Um, and it's often hard to get people in the room. If they're all from differing areas, is that actually useful to them? So but yeah, my experience has been that it typically tends to be that kind of one-to-one small group, and I wanted to know, was that the same for other people? And it kind of varied. I was actually really surprised. Like, this is very small scale, and some of these answers, like, we would have to interrogate a bit more. So, but it was really interesting to see that there were some kind of group-based efforts happening, and some kind of many-to-many or one-to-many or many-to-one kind of approaches happening. And people mentioned, you can see that a couple of additional responses like community of practice, cross-faculty redesign started to come in. Doesn't mean they're happening necessarily a lot, but I just thought it was really good to note that there may be a diversity of approaches, and at least just recognizing that there's a diversity of approaches, and that that one-to-one relationship doesn't have to be the way that you do that kind of work. I think that is really useful to start like unpacking that and looking at, okay, which types of approaches might be possible, and then based on that, which ones might actually work for particular outcomes that you want to meet. Which is really where it could be more useful if we're trying to reach particular learning and teaching outcomes or particular change, effective change outcomes. So ad hoc and drop-in support was also raised quite a bit. And people in the comments also mentioned that that was really, that was a really big thing for them to implement large change, especially relying on, say, students to help with last minute at elbow support, or really one-to-one support more to get people over the line. So I thought that was really useful. The other thing that came out with the responses was around localized approaches, that really working with discipline teams seems to work, having institutional knowledge rather than trying to maybe outsource work to other parties seem to work better in terms of getting buy-in, or having, just having people who understand the local context of the university. So I thought that was really useful. There's a little bit around evaluation, but there wasn't enough kind of qual data to back up what's happening, but it still seemed like you could see here that 5 out of 20 noted no evaluation, which is a little bit concerning. So it'd be good to kind of tease that out. And there are a couple of people who mentioned that evaluation wasn't really being done that well, or that there was, limited evaluation. There were also just some other notes around resourcing and effective change management coming up, both in terms of paying people out seemed to work, not paying people out seemed to be an issue. So there was the sorts of comments that came through was around, especially in terms of what we could learn and the things that seemed to work well or didn't work well, really tended to favour, or really highlighted that need for effective change management. So having a clarity of purpose around the change, the comms, the messaging, agreed outputs, clear lines of responsibility, having a sponsor or people leadership level who are really taking ownership of that, cross-team collaboration, all of those things really affect outcomes. So they need to be worked in and resourced and planned from the get-go to have really good projects with, effective outcomes. So that was kind of what came up, and it mostly echoes what my kind of experience, but I was pleasantly surprised by seeing some of that diversity of approaches, and I'd really like to get into it a bit more to see, okay, when are these being used? So if workshops are being used, are they really only being used for tech change, or are they being used for curriculum change? And how well are they working in practice? And, to know when can we use those, and when are they effective in terms of
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kate. And yes, apologies for the mixed messaging. This is absolutely a session about the change initiatives. I just got a bit sidetracked on our promotion and branding, and yeah, landed on LMSs. But yeah, I mean, and look, an LMS change is a very common one, but as you've mentioned, there are just as many projects on, we're going to change the way everyone does their courses and uplift and all of that kind of stuff. So it is good to have all of this bundled into one thing. So we'll just quickly move on. And our final presenter is Anthony Tibbs, who's an educational experience project lead at Edith Cowan University. And in his role, he focuses on leading significant projects relating to educational technology and has been instrumental in managing the transition of students and staff to ECU's new learning management system. His recent work has included creating AI-driven learning experiences using platforms such as ChatGPT and Cogniti. So over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Colin. Hi, everyone. So yeah, that's my job title is a project title. So it's a bit hard to explain to people, but that's the project I'm working on at the moment. And previously I was working on the LMS transition. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. I would like to acknowledge the country that I'm speaking to you from, which is the Noongar country here in WA. So I've actually got some pretty minimalist slides for you today. Really, I wanted to talk a little bit about the project overview, and also a little bit about the evaluation. So actually, we'll be picking up on a lot of points that Kate and Michael have shared. So, Michael talked about the different LMSs around the country and how that changed. You may have noticed that in WA, one ticked over to Canvas. That was Edith Cowan University, and that was the project that I was working on. And yes, it's certainly true that when I was beginning the evaluation process, I put a few calls out to say, well, who else has done an LMS project evaluation? I'd love to hear about it. And I really did not I did hear back from some people, but not that many. So it was a challenge actually to find other people that had done detailed evaluations. So a little bit about the project then. Oh, I'm showing you the, just one second here. So hopefully you can still see my slides are on. Is that all good? Yep, cool. Okay, so what about the project then? I'll just give a little bit of context. So it was a pretty large scale project. It was actually, the LMS transition was a program that was divided into two projects. There was the technical change project, the technical transition project, and the staff and student transition project. So I was the project lead on the staff and student transition project, which is called the academic transition project. So we actually had a staged rollout. So we did it over 3 years. We started with a very small pilot, and then we rolled into some like a very small pilot, then a slightly bigger pilot, and then we called them launches, and we got sort of everybody over across 2 more semesters. So we actually transitioned over 2,100 units. We supported directly over 600 staff, and probably were involved with more across the entire institution. And we also actually did over almost 2,000 reviews of the unit sites, both before and after they transitioned into Canvas. And that was against our technology enhanced learning standards. So it was really interesting. There's some comments in the chat there, and also what Kate was mentioning about, having a minimum online presence, the balance of getting people smoothly across into the new system versus what kind of uplift can we do, what kind of improvements. So that was really trying to measure that, measured the change that we had before and after. Yeah, so that just hopefully gives you a little bit of a sense of the scale of the project. So it was a lot of hard work with a lot of people involved, not only from people in the project team that we recruited a lot of people into the project team. And actually, I think I'm going to give a shout out to one person on the project team. Amber Glaskin is here on the call, I think, as well. We had lots of other wonderful people as well. And of course, it involved lots of people, academic and professional staff. So in terms of the evaluation, so this was actually completed over several months at the end of the project. So this is when we'd pretty much transitioned everybody. It was part of the handover process to business as usual. And so I was pretty much the last person standing on the project team that had gone up to about 15 or 20 people at its peak. And I sort of head down doing the evaluation. And really what I was focusing on was to try and answer in terms of what actually happened during the project and to what extent did the project actually meet the select outcomes. So actually, I do have one other slide that I wanted to show, which is these were actually the evaluation research questions. So, or it was really one question, but against 4 different outcomes. So obviously, in the project, we had lots and lots of deliverables and so on. But in terms of evaluating, we selected the 4 key ones that were that we had data against, but also that I thought were the most valuable in terms of lessons learned and future projects as well. So first one was, staff and students have the knowledge, skills, and confidence to use the new system Canvas. Staff understand how the new LMS can be fully leveraged for improved efficiency and teaching innovation. The LMS is compelling and provides an intentionally active role in engaging students, and unit sites are compliant with ECU's updated TEL standards. So you can see there's definitely that line around compliance there, especially with our minimum TEL standards that we had. Yeah, so and so basically what to do to answer these research questions, used a mixed methods approach. So we used a lot of, I compiled a lot of institutional data. So we had engagement analytics from Canvas, training sessions, our drop-ins, even got support tickets from the various channels where people could ask for help around Canvas. We also had an extract of the students' unit survey. So we call them the UTEIs here at ECU. So we got an extract, which was just for one question we added about Canvas during the transition. So it was a lot of really interesting qualitative data from students from all across the university that answered this optional question. And then we had the unit readiness checks and TEL reports that I mentioned as well. So this was data we collected by looking at the LMS sites. We also conducted staff surveys after each phase in the transition. And then I also we did a final survey, which went out to all staff that were involved in the whole transition project, and also held a couple of focus groups as well. So all of that took a little bit of time to, shall we say, digest, and I produced a 77-page internal report, including appendices, which was really substantial when you're trying to synthesize all of that data and really look at that and answer those 4 questions. And at the moment, working towards actually trying to get this report or get the evaluation published externally. So I did actually get ethics for it. But yes, obviously it takes a little bit longer to take it outside the institution. So I can't really share that much of the data today, unfortunately, because but hopefully in the future you'll be able to really dig in when we actually get to publish that. So I did want to talk a little bit about the benefits and challenges of doing this evaluation. So start with the positive. So I think for me, doing the evaluation, it was really a chance to actually measure and sort of celebrate the positive impacts of the project, because so many people were involved. And actually, a lot of it did really go quite well in our transition. I think we were overall pretty well resourced, and we had a lot of executive support for the different elements of the project we were working on. So it was actually, we could not just say, oh, we thought that went pretty well, but I had a lot of data to show what worked and what didn't work. And it also was a chance to actually make sense of what was an extremely complicated project. There was all kinds of moving parts. It also, by creating that report, there's actually really quite thorough documentation of what was done. So that's actually producing quite a useful artifact for the institution, should it look at it, to actually see what happened during that, what were the recommendations, and so on. And really, when you're evaluating, I tried to, there's quite a few different frameworks, but really looking at the core question was what I mentioned earlier, was like what actually happened and how far did we hit those outcomes. But also it's a chance to think about, when you're looking at these really big change projects, it could be an LMS transition like we had, or many of the other projects that are happening at the moment for all kinds of reasons. Many, for example, AI is triggering a lot of changes, I think, at different institutions now. So it's to think about, what can we stop, start, and continue, and really look honestly at what worked as planned and what didn't. Because I think what happens is, with these big projects, they're really time intensive, a lot of resources, and people pretty much when they're done, people just want to move on to the next thing. And actually, they're not that interested very often in what actually happened. So, but I think that that's a real, as Kate said, it's a real gap if you don't take the time to do that. So you can get a lot of really valuable insights by taking the time to do the evaluation. And then those insights, you can actually make recommendations, really specific recommendations for the future projects. And actually, during the LMS, the evaluation project that I did, I organized a co-design workshop where I actually got the people that were, not only, well, whoever was left from the project team, because many people had actually moved on by that point, but all the people especially in the Center for Learning and Teaching that were responsible for that would really be responsible for maybe taking on a lot of those recommendations. So what I did was actually, we ran quite a lengthy workshop where I showed them the data that had come without actually any kind of, and sort of stop there, here's the project, here's the data. And we spent quite a long time actually co-designing those recommendations. So the people from our learning technologies team, the learning designers, and all kinds of groups were involved. And those recommendations were actually included in the report. So that, that's a really, can be a really fantastic opportunity to bring teams together that might not have a chance to talk about this kind of stuff and reflect and plan and think about the future as well. So it can be really, really valuable. And finally, the final advantage is it can generate a potential to really maintain momentum. So, often you have a project team, they might come in and do the work, or people get seconded onto the project, then they move on to other things. You can sometimes miss that kind of the momentum from what comes out of the project. Because as we went through the LMS change, you might have a lot of things you want to do. And as you have to prioritize and things happen, there's a few things you might say, well, actually, we're not going to do this yet, but it would be really good to do that next. And if you don't, like an evaluation is a really great chance to say, to capture those as actions or recommendations. So it can really help with that handover. But there are a lot of challenges, of course. The first thing really is the time investment. So to do a full evaluation, the kind of the scale that I went into was really, you're asking people's time in terms of the staff and students that are responding to surveys and maybe participating in focus groups, and also maybe people in your colleagues that might be involved, the project team. So it can really, it is an extra thing that really should be planned into your project timeline. Like you really should. And if you don't, it will be quite difficult to fit it in. I think it's probably why people might not always get around to doing it. Also, if you want to publish it externally, you can get ethics, but I wasn't sort of fitting within a school, so it actually took quite a long time to get ethics for our project. It was quite challenging. So that was a bit of a roadblock in terms of sharing. That can be quite difficult. And really, when you're evaluating, it can be really confronting to evaluate your own and your team's hard work. Because some things did go really well, but sometimes people will, if you're doing your job right and you're listening, you're going to get some home truths about what wasn't so good. And that can be quite confronting, actually, and it can be difficult not to get too defensive, So you have to have a pretty thick skin. And I think the final challenge is around the uptake of the recommendations. So you might spend a lot of time making an evaluation, putting together a report, but you might end up with a 77-page report, which not everyone's going to have time to read in detail. And so that can mean that sometimes the uptake of the recommendations can be really challenging. They might be responsible of the responsibility of other teams who are moving on to new challenges. They have different priorities. And the other challenge that we faced as well was the perception that the LMS transition had actually gone quite smoothly. So people were like, but didn't we finish that? Didn't it go well? Why are you looking at this in such detail? So it was quite an interesting thing. So yeah, just a few reflections and thoughts on it. But I would say overall, definitely worth doing. You can really get a lot out of. There can be a lot of benefits despite the challenges.
Fantastic. Yep. Thank you so much, Anthony. And again, there is so much in this process, and it touches so many different areas of the institution. And you're right. I think because these are such large projects, once it's done, it's kind of like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. I just want to take a little break. But then, leadership is like, now we're going to move on to the next big thing. So I don't see any big questions currently in the chat, but I do encourage people to post questions that they'd like to put to the panel. And while we're waiting for that, I'm just going to ask everyone, how do we actually, what do you think we can do to take what we've learned from these kind of big projects and use them in our institutions so that, we hopefully don't make the same mistakes next time, or we capitalize on the positive actions that we actually did. I might throw to Michael for that one just to start with.
Right, thanks.
Come on.
My perspective is quite clear. I mean, that you've got representative bodies like ACODE, Escalite, people like that, who all their members have gone through this stuff over recent years, many years. I mean, I've been through 4 LMS reviews. So part of what's happening is we're starting to see some publications coming about this. But I think actually what we need is to do a bit more work around benchmarking this rather than just writing about it. So through the combination of papers and processes, I think we can develop some other benchmarks around LMS reviews, and not just LMS reviews, but other systematic reviews that have to happen across that learning ecology, whether it be ePortfolios, whether it be lecture capture systems, proctoring systems, whatever it might be. There are a whole range of processes that need to be contained, and I see that we need to provide some clearer guidance to our institutions doing that, so that it's not left in the hands of the DVCAs who say, that's what I want to do and that's what's going to happen.
Kate, Anthony, do you have anything to add to that? No, it's okay if you don't.
I mean, just to note that, Michael mentioned sharing is a big thing. And I think Anthony already mentioned, sorry, I'm just setting spotlights. Anthony already mentioned publication is a big piece, and Michael's mentioned the same. And then Michael mentioned partnerships with other institutions. So they've already both mentioned some great ideas. I'd love to know more about the partnerships aspect as well. And the benchmarking piece and how do we better use, ACODE or share, especially around evaluation, just those business requirements and make sure that they're really robust.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the business requirements are so often so similar. And I've been through some of these processes and, it's kind of like, can't we just copy paste what those guys did last year? All right.
Let's put together that spreadsheet. We found that, most of the LMSs do most of that stuff. And so then it's deciding where the value adds and where the latest bits and pieces. But that's all transitory, because, I mean, the next LMS just kind of play, catch up over each other. So, yeah.
They do. All right. Got a couple of questions. So, Gordon.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what do you see as the main trigger for some of these processes? I mean, obviously, sometimes you come to an end of contract and so forth. I was sort of thinking, is there any sort of concerns around the risks, either the financial viability of safety in numbers, technology triggers? In other words, a vendor basically changes a significant component of the technology, and that basically becomes the trigger. In addition to that, I guess the other thing that I'm also looking at as well is that we're just looking at the learning management system, and it's actually been quite starting to get spread out in terms of a platform. So we've seen the addition of front-end catalog, e-commerce gateways, micro-credential systems, and so forth. And I guess what I'm sort of asking is that we're just looking simply at the learning management system as the core, and should we also be looking at some of the overall functionality that's starting to grow and creep into these environments?
I think there's also this notion that many of the tools that are developing are also developing functionalities that the LMS has. I mean, I take, for example, the notion of feedback fruits or Stackle or those types of tools that, and even PebblePad that, which have functionalities that are replicated many times. So as LMSs start to incorporate more video into their platforms as a native thing, and yet we've got our video platforms established already, there's a point at which we need to say, okay, well, all of a sudden we've ended up with Stream, we've got Kaltura, we've got video that's going to happen in the LMS. All of a sudden we've got 3 or 4 options, which makes it really difficult for our teaching staff to make the right choices. The PD overhead goes up, the cost of these systems goes up over years. So there's a whole range of things that need to be considered in that LMS review. It's not just the LMS that's being reviewed, it's that ecology I mentioned before that has to be reviewed at the same time.
Anthony, Kate, anything to add to that? You can say no, it's okay.
Look, yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge as well. If you think, an LMS, typically institutions will stick with that for maybe 10 years. The contracts are quite long. And for me, I think what's going to be interesting, it's not just the fact that every tool is trying to be an LMS, but now every tool is adding AI of all kinds as well. So I think that the definitions between tools, the overlaps, defining your ecosystem, trying to find one tool for one function, I think is getting harder and harder actually.
Mike, I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So Craig's posted a question in the chat. I have a question about longer term business as usual costs, considering academic do-it-yourself on one end and the other end where an OPM does everything for you. Both have advantages, but if you don't get the system right in the first instance, then maybe the BAU costs can be greater. Anyone want to comment on that one? Or you could ask for clarification, or did you want to expand on that, Craig?
Yeah, I suppose the point was, I've used, from a learning designer when you've had to build things, I've used some systems, where you just drag and drop stuff, like blocks. I won't say which one, but it makes life so much easier compared to other systems. And often it's not the system, it's just how it's been set up as well. So I suppose. Yeah, so I'm just thinking.
Okay, so it's kind of like, is the usability of how much of the usability is considered in, how a tool is going to be used in the long term?
Yeah, that's right.
I think there are a couple other questions around, like that ties into that other one about, are all the tools trying to just be another LMS, which I hate. I have to support PebblePad. Sorry, PebblePad. But it's, it becomes not just that question about are people going to use it in ways that we're not expecting? And then what does that mean for, say, backing up the data if it's in these other systems? And what does that mean from a risk to the institution or a risk to students' consistent experience? But, it also just means that all of the tools end up being massively complex because they're handling all this extra functionality. And so from a training perspective, it makes my job really hard because I'm having to train people on using 3 LMSs instead of one LMS with additional integrations, right? So I really kind of dislike it. I think that there's a piece around who are the stakeholders and who are the users of the products that is infinitely complex and never unpacked properly. In that, we LMSs or a lot of the technologies typically get built with the student experience in mind, which is great, but forgetting that the student experience of these technologies is often tied to whatever the, dare I say it, content is, which is often in large public unis based on the academics' ability to use these technologies. So, and in which case, the main user that we should be focusing on is who is putting in these activities and this content and designing these experiences for the students. Because if they can't use the products, then it doesn't, like, that end experience for the student is still going to be crap. Do you know what I mean? So, and it's fine for like Craig and I as learning designers, because this is our bread and butter. And so if you're in, say, a private provider or an OPM who would typically farm that work out, it's a different story, because we can all learn how to use them well, and we can lock it down, so that people who are teaching maybe don't get to have the same control over everything in the system. But for the most part, we give our teaching staff a lot of agency, which can be a really good thing. But it means that comes with, this need to keep these systems well designed so that those people can do their jobs effectively. So I don't know if I've rambled too much, but yeah.
I think that covers it quite nicely. We're just about at time, and so I'm going to take the luxury of asking the final question. So Michael, Anthony, and Kate, imagine that you're still working. You haven't retired yet. What would the dream version of your next project be, where everything is just done the way that you think it should be done and has the most impact and the greatest kind of outcomes? Anyone want to start?
I think the thing is, the use by dates and all things, these change. So I mean, you've got the LMS you're reviewing this time, then you've got your ePortfolio you've got to do in a couple of years. It'd be really nice to be able to cut it all loose and then to start afresh with your preferred option. So you've got if you've got your learning technologies roadmaps that go over years, I mean, you've got return on investment periods and things like that. But if you can just cut it all out, just kill it all off and start again from scratch, that'd be fantastic.
No, that's fair.
I think I would say Kate posted, adequate resourcing. I think that's a big thing. The next project would have enough money, not just for what's considered, the hard things, like you must transfer this, but actually sufficient resourcing for things like change management, which is often a bit kind of harder to define, but actually really critical. And for me as well, it would be balancing kind of top down and bottom up. So you can have the strategic vision and the leadership, but also allowing for the ideas and the connections to also be kind of flowing both ways. I think that for me, when that's working well, can be really beneficial for big change projects.
Yeah, I probably similar, and I put, being clear about the outcomes that you're trying to achieve up front, and having that as a really clear message for everybody, and using evaluation tied to that, and funding and resourcing adequately. I think the other piece is also just ideally having good leadership who understands digital technology, understands change management projects, understands the institutional, like having good sponsorship who understands the complexities and nuances of these types of large change projects. And like Michael is great in that space. I'm certainly not talking about Michael, but just having like good, like strategic leadership who really understands that, and then has access to the money and can really make the stuff happen, and access to the different faculties to kind of really, I guess, be that, sometimes that you need that real leadership to kind of own it and be pushing it, or be, saying this is what we value, and really articulating that.
Can I just add one thing, Colin?
Of course.
That pedagogy was the reason you do this, not technology.
That's crazy.
I know.
All right. Look, thank you all. I think this has been a really enlightening and engaging discussion. And I mean, look, there's so much to cover in a topic like this. Our next webinar will be the last Thursday of October, same time, depending on your time zones, obviously. It's kind of to be determined, but it may be focused on professional development opportunities for people in the third space. We're still working that one out. The recording will be up in a couple of days, and don't forget to take a look at the thirdspace symposium.com website. Thanks, everyone.